Hello there, my name is Sarah, and I'm reading a ghost story set in old Edinburgh. It's called Secret City by Jan Andrew Henderson, and this is chapter 5 The Graveyard. After dinner at the guest house, Charlie's parents got ready to go to the big top and perform their act. "Do you want to come and watch?" said his father, pulling on a pair of yellow spangled tights. I think I'll just stay in and read." Charlie shook his head. "You're not going to walk through town dressed like that, are you?" "Oh, don't worry, Charlie. Everyone will be staring at your mother." Charlie's mother appeared to be wearing nothing more than 3 ostrich feathers. "And you don't need to wait up. We thought we might go for a drink after the show. That's if we don't plunge to our deaths from the high wire." Only joking. As soon as his parents were gone, Charlie pulled the diary from his bag, flopped onto his bed and began to read. William Makepeace had close, shaky handwriting that made his long, badly spelt sentences even more difficult to read. "My best friend and constant companion is a boy a little older than I, Duncan MacPhail, who was my great fortune to meet, for his strength is admirable and his bravery beyond question, and it was he who persuaded me to give up my dishonourable profession." Oh, Charlie felt his eyes drooping already. Hadn't this boy ever heard of full stops? He tried to remember what Lily had said about using his imagination and concentrating on the story rather than the words. Charlie had to admit it. He wanted to know what this William Makepeace did that was so terrible. Apart from not learning to punctuate sentences, he looked at the book again. "I was sitting in Greyfriars Graveyard when I met Duncan for the first time. A fine spring day when the trees were heavy with white and pink blossoms." Charlie tried ignoring the writing and concentrate on what the writer was actually saying. He pictured ornate gravestones, stately trees ruffled by a cool spring breeze. And then the strangest thing happened. In his head, he could suddenly see a small boy sitting on a flat tombstone and writing in a book. William Makepeace looked up at the scented blossom drifting past his head and landing on the vellum-covered journal balanced between his knees. 200 yards away, through the scattered gravestones, he could see a group of mourners in black frock coats and tall stovepipe hats attending a funeral. The boy watched them out of the corner of his eye and then took a quill pen and an ink pot from his pocket, dipped the nib and carefully made some notes. A shadow fell across the flat tombstone on which he sat and he looked up in surprise. 3 angry-looking youths, one holding a stout club, stood over him, their burly form blocking out the sun. "We know what you're up to, pal." One of the youths slammed the stick down on the flat stone an inch from the boy's knee. The mourners didn't look round. "You're going to wish you'd never set foot in this graveyard." "Now then, I was already thinking it was a bad idea," the boy said pleasantly, shutting the book. "So, I'll be on my way, gents, and we'll say no more about it." "Think you're clever, do you?" The largest of the 3 boys nodded to his ragged companions. "Grab his arms, I'm going to teach this wee sod a lesson." As the toughs moved forward to seize the boy, they heard a cough from behind the nearby tree, and a tall youth stepped into the sunlight. I dinna think that 3 big lads against 1 wee one is fair, no matter what he's done," the stranger said calmly. His hair was long and black, and a thick tartan plaid was draped over his shoulder, then fastened around his waist with an ornate pin. His strange attire marked him out as a Highlander, not a common sight in the city, which still treated the fierce clans of northern Scotland with fear and mistrust. He kept himself between the sun and his assailants, so that his features were difficult to make out. "This is no your fight, friend." The largest youth stepped forward menacingly, shading his eyes with his hand. "Go about your business and leave us to ours." "I don't mind if he joins in," said William Makepeace. "I think it would even up the odds nicely as One of the gang lashed out, the back of his calloused hand catching Makepeace a glancing blow on the temple, knocking him backwards off the tombstone. Without a second's hesitation, the Highlander launched himself forward, head down, arms spread wide. His shoulder crashed into the gang leader's chest, and his outstretched fist slammed into the stomachs of the henchmen on either side. Next moment, all three toughs were on the ground, gasping for air, and the Highlander was standing above them, brandishing the stick. In his other hand, a small but deadly-looking knife had appeared. "Go on, get out before I cut you." He motioned towards the cemetery's iron gates, and the gang got unsteadily to their feet and ran. The knife vanished into the Highlander's tunic, and he helped the little boy to his feet. "Up you get, wee man. You all right?" He bent down and retrieved the fallen book. "I'm fine, thank you, and most indebted to you for saving me." The boy held out his hand. "My name's William Makepeace, but my friends call me Beazle, and so do my enemies for that matter, and I obviously have quite a few." The Highlander shook the hand. "Duncan MacPhail from Afton House. I didn't have any enemies," he smiled. "At least not alive." "Then I will count you a friend," said Beazle. "May I have my journal back?" "This is a funny kind of book now, isn't it?" Duncan opened the journal and looked at the first page. "I've been watching you write in it, and yet there's nothing here." He flicked through the remaining pages until you get to the back. That is, and then there's a map of the cemetery. He motioned to the crowd of mourners clustered around the open grave like unhappy shadows. "And you've been making a wee tick, marking the spot where the funeral has taken place." "It's my hobby," the boy said casually. "Funeral spotting." The Highlander's eyes narrowed. "It's my guess that you work for the Resurrection Men, and that's why the wee gang wished you harm." He looked at the stout stick and then back at Beazle. "I heard stories of such a thing, but I never believed that they were true." The Resurrection Men were the most despised of the city's many criminals, for they stole bodies from graveyards and sold them for unscrupulous scientists at Edinburgh University to experiment on. To avoid suspicion, they often employed children as lookouts or had them mark out the sites of recently buried corpses. Then the body snatchers could return at night, rob the grave without falling over a dozen headstones in the dark. Beazle was quick to defend himself. "You think it's easy for an orphan living in this city? I have to eat, you know." He angrily snatched the book from the larger boy. "I pick pockets too. I might as well tell you. It's either that or I get sent up some chimney for a living and maybe suffocate down a Lothian mine opening a trapdoor for coal carts." The Highlander placed a hand on the smaller boy's shoulder. "Calm down, my friend. I know what it's like to go hungry myself. I was forced to come down from the Highlands because there's no work to be had in the north." He spat on the ground in anger. "I've been here for over a week, and I must admit I'm faring no better." "No luck?" "Oh, I have a job in an iron foundry where I work from 6 in the morning until 8 at night for a few pennies. I sleep in a doorway because there's no lodgings to be had." The pickpocket could see that Duncan's piercing blue eyes were ringed by dark circles, and his fine cheekbones were made even sharper by exhaustion. It suddenly occurred to Beazle that his new friend could only be a couple of years older than the pickpocket himself, perhaps 14 or 15. The Highlander looked around at the laden boughs and the lush green grass. "I like it here, because it's the only place in this overcrowded hellhole of a city where I can get a wee bit of peace," he said. Beazle could see what he meant. Though dirty tenements surrounded the high walls of Greyfriars, the graveyard held only the funeral party, a courting couple, and a few disrespectful orphans playing hide-and-seek. Tranquility like that was rare in overcrowded Edinburgh, for famine and unsympathetic landowners had forced wave after wave of immigrants from the Scottish and Irish countryside to move to the cities. The population of the old town had doubled in the last 30 years. "I seen a hawk here yesterday," said Duncan. "A white one, with black tips on each wing. I've never seen anything like it before. Didn't look right in such a dirty sky." The Highlander grabbed a falling blossom and sniffed at it, but no fragrance could block out the smell of coal smoke and sewage that permeated the city. I come here a lot myself, said the pickpocket, not just to spy on the funerals, he added quickly. He patted the gravestone on which he'd been sitting. I always sit here on the grave of Alan Ramsay. He was a great poet, you know, and a man of learning, and yet he started off as a humble shepherd, so I heard. Nothing wrong with being a shepherd, said Duncan with a scowl. Listen, you help me, the little pickpocket said. I'd like to return the favour. If you know where to stay, then you're welcome to lodge with me for a while. Duncan thought for a second, then he leant back behind the gravestone and picked up a small knapsack. Your hospitality is worthy of a Highlander himself, and I gladly accept. Where do you stay? The underground city. That sounds powerful grim. So does sleeping in a doorway. Come on. He led Duncan out of the graveyard, up the old town ridge onto the high street. For a few minutes they pushed their way through the crowds, thronging between the bristling tenements, until Peasel turned down a narrow and steeply sloping sewage-filled alley. The South Bridge, said Peasel as they neared the bottom. Home, sweet home. The boys stood in the shadow of the bridge's towering pillars, its grimy brick flanks studded with openings leading to internal vaults. The chambers, which had been designed to hold goods and wares, but because of Edinburgh's horrific overcrowding, now held people. The tenements that would eventually hide the vault entrances had not yet been built, but Peasel and the Highlander simply stepped from the street into the interior of the bridge. This is my vault, Peasel finally pointed to a smoky chamber where 3 men were playing cards by candlelight. It's smelly and it's dark, and you might get murdered in your bed, but at least it's dry. There was a squelch as he stepped through the doorway. Well, dry-ish. It smells to high heaven. The Highlander wrinkled his nose. You actually pay for this. I pay Merry Andrew. Peasel lowered his voice and indicated one of the card players. The man slowly rose to his feet. Once he was standing, he had to stoop to avoid hitting his head on the roof. He's the biggest, so the vault belongs to him. The little pickpocket turned to the rough-looking man. His face was a rash of pockmarks and grey stubble, except for where a large scar ran from ear to chin. Mary, this is Duncan MacPhail from the Highlands, and I want to share my space with him for a while. Merry Andrew looked far from merry. In fact, he looked as if he could tear almost most men apart with his bare hands, and he was in the mood to do it. Oh, really? And suppose I don't want Duncan MacPhail in my vault, he growled, his voice broken by a lifetime of loud cursing and cheap grog. You think this place isn't crowded enough? He towered over the 2 boys. I reckon I'll throw Duncan out of my vault and charge you double for even suggesting it. Then Duncan might come back in the middle of the night and cut off your ears while you sleep. The Highlander spoke softly, but the small knife glinted in his hand once more. If you're going to make enemies so easily, it's better to keep them close so you can see what they're up to. There was a stunned silence. The other card players looked at each other and gave a low whistle. Merry Andrew glowered, then he half smiled, then he laughed out loud. Well spoken, Highlander, he said, slapping Duncan on the back. I like your spirit. Help me a week and you can stay. I collect the money prompt each Friday. Peasel finally let his breath out. Later that night, Merry Andrew and his companions went to the local tavern to play dice. Where did you get such a fine book? Duncan picked up Peasel's journal. Looks expensive. I see you've got an expensive quill pen too. Stole it from one of the bookstalls in Blair Street, the pickpocket said. I've always wanted to write something of value, like men of learning do. Taught myself to read in the poorhouse, I did. I can't read nor write myself, said the Highlander. Where I come from, it's more important to learn to hunt and fight. He lay down in the pile of rough sacks and straw that served as bedding in the underground city. Still, it seems a shame to waste such a bonny book. What do you mean? Why don't you stop using it to do the body snatcher's dirty work? Keep a proper diary instead. The Highlander blew out the candle, plunging the vault into darkness. Someone might want to read it for years from now, and then you will live forever. I doubt that, said the pickpocket, but he lay awake for a long time, smiling in the dark. He had a proper friend at last, And to show his gratitude, he would take his friend's advice. I've got to stop doing all these throaty voices. Anyway, chaps, I hope that you've cleaned your teeth. I hope that you've washed your hands today. I want you now to snuggle into your bed, give yourself a great big huge cuddle. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. Night night.